Marcus Bell had exactly $43 in his checking account when the call came in. He was standing in the parking lot of Coldwell Logistics, still holding the cardboard box that used to sit on his desk. A stapler, a chipped coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Dad," a photo of his 8-year-old daughter Ava missing her front tooth. 12 years. 12 years he had given that company. And they walked him out in under 9 minutes, flanked by a security guard who wouldn't even look him in the eye. If you've ever been told your work no longer matters after you gave everything you had to it, you already know the feeling sitting in Marcus's chest right now. And if this story means something to you, do me a favor before we go any further. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next to this single father is the kind of turnaround you broke and not going to want to miss. Marcus stood there in the October wind, box against his hip, and stared at his phone. 3 missed calls from Ava's school. His stomach dropped harder than it had 10 minutes ago when his manager, Gary Pruitt, had slid a manila folder across the desk and said, "It's just restructuring, Marcus. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." As if 12 years of double shifts, of missing Ava's dance recitals to cover warehouse audits, of being the guy who never called in sick, could be erased with 2 words on a termination letter. He called the school back with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Mr. Bell," the school secretary said, "Ava's fine. She's fine, I promise. But she's been asking for you all day. She said today's the day, and I honestly don't know what she means by that." Marcus closed his eyes. Today's the day. He knew exactly what she meant. Today was the day her school held its career day, where kids proudly announced what their parents did. Ava, unlike most 7-year-olds, hadn't picked a superhero fantasy. She'd picked the truth. "My dad runs the loading operations at Coldwell Logistics, and he's the best at his job in the whole world." She had rehearsed that line with him 3 nights in a row at the kitchen table, practicing her voice, standing tall like he'd taught her. He hadn't had the heart to tell her yet that in 9 minutes, none of that was true anymore. Marcus drove to the school on autopilot, the taste of shame thick in his mouth. He'd lost his wife 2 years earlier, not to divorce, but to a car accident on a rain-slicked highway that took her before Ava had even turned 6. Since then, it had been just the 2 of them, a team of 2 against the world. And Marcus had built his entire sense of worth around being the man who never let his daughter down. Today, he felt like he already had. When he walked into that classroom, Ava's face lit up like sunrise. She ran to him in front of her whole class, threw her arms around his waist, and announced proudly, "This is my dad. He's a boss at Coldwell." The other kids clapped. Marcus smiled through it, the box he'd left in the truck weighing on him like it was still in his arms. He nodded, said a few generic things about keeping the trucks moving, and the team he was proud of. Every word a small betrayal of the truth he didn't yet have the courage to say. That night, after Ava was tucked in, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills, a laptop open to job listings, and a silence in the house that felt louder than any warehouse floor. He thought about calling his old college roommate, Denny, who now ran a small but growing regional freight company 2 states over. They hadn't talked in almost a year, not since Denny's last message. "Anytime you want out of that place, there's a seat with your name on it." Marcus had always brushed it off, loyal to a fault, believing Coldwell would eventually recognize what he brought to the table. He almost didn't make the call. Pride is a strange thing. It convinces you that admitting defeat is worse than sitting in defeat, quietly. But then he looked at the framed photo on the counter, Ava's gap-toothed grin, and he thought about the promise he'd made at his wife's funeral, that he would never let their daughter grow up watching her father give up. He dialed. Denny picked up on the second ring, genuinely thrilled to hear from him. Marcus explained everything: the layoff, the restructuring, Gary Pruitt's cold, practiced apology. Denny listened without interrupting, and when Marcus finished, there was a pause on the line before Denny said something that would change everything. "Marcus, I need to tell you something, and it's going to sound insane, but I need you to hear me out completely before you react." Marcus frowned. "Okay." Coldwell's biggest client, the one account keeping half their logistics division afloat. is Vantage Retail. And Vantage Retail's regional contract renewal meeting is in 11 days. I know, because I'm bidding against Coldwell for that exact contract. And I know, because the account executive over there, Priya Shah, is an old friend of mine. She's been quietly telling anyone who'll listen that Coldwell's on-time delivery rates have been slipping for 6 months, ever since they cut the experienced route supervisors to save on payroll, ever since they cut people like you. The room went very still. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not vindication exactly, but the sharp, clean sensation of a puzzle piece locking into place. He'd warned Gary Pruitt about exactly this 3 separate times in the last 2 quarters. He'd flagged the staffing gaps in writing. He'd told them that cutting senior route coordinators to hit a quarterly savings target would eventually catch up with them on service reliability. He'd been right, and they'd fired him anyway, apparently believing his salary was a bigger threat to the bottom line than his warnings were. "Denny," Marcus said slowly, "what exactly are you asking me?" "I'm asking you to come run operations for us. Not as a favor, not as charity, because you're the best route optimization mind I've ever known, and because in 11 days, when we walk into that room to pitch Vantage Retail, I want the guy who actually understands why Coldwell is failing, standing right beside me, telling them how we'll fix it." Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table until 2 a.m., running numbers, sketching out delivery route models on the backs of old bills, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, not since before his wife died, before grief had folded him inward and made ambition feel like a luxury he couldn't afford. He felt alive. The next 11 days moved like a blur. Marcus threw himself into preparing Denny's pitch with an intensity that startled even him. He worked from the kitchen table while Ava did her homework beside him, occasionally looking up to ask what he was building. "I'm building us a new beginning, baby," he told her one night, and she'd nodded like that made perfect sense, the way children accept a parent's confidence as fact. He rebuilt entire delivery corridors from scratch, cross-referencing traffic patterns, warehouse throughput, driver shift efficiency, everything Coldwell had ignored in their rush to cut costs. He identified exactly where Coldwell's system was bleeding reliability, and more importantly, exactly how Denny's smaller, leaner company could outperform them without the same overhead. He wasn't just building a pitch, he was building proof. Proof to himself, proof to Ava, proof to every person who had ever doubted the value of a man who worked in a warehouse instead of a corner office. On the morning of the pitch, Marcus put on the one good suit he owned, the one he'd worn to his wife's funeral, which felt strange and fitting all at once, like closing one chapter to open another. Ava straightened his collar with tiny, serious hands. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "A little," he admitted, "but I know what I'm talking about, and sometimes that's enough." The pitch meeting was in a downtown conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the freight yards Marcus used to manage. Priya Shah sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 Vantage Retail executives. And to Marcus's genuine shock, on the opposite side of the table, walking in 7 minutes late with a stack of glossy slides, was Gary Pruitt himself. Gary froze when he saw Marcus seated beside Denny. For a moment, something like panic crossed his face, before he masked it with a tight, professional smile. "Marcus, didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I. A couple weeks ago," Marcus said evenly. The meeting that followed was the best hour of Marcus's professional life. Coldwell's presentation was polished but hollow, full of buzzwords about synergy and operational excellence that didn't hide the fact that their on-time delivery percentage had dropped nearly 9 points in 2 quarters. When Priya asked Gary directly why reliability had slipped, he stumbled through vague talk of market conditions and temporary staffing adjustments. Then it was Marcus's turn. He didn't use buzzwords. He used numbers, maps, and 12 years of first-hand knowledge of exactly how freight moved through that region. Knowledge Coldwell had thrown away, along with his termination letter. He showed Priya precisely which routes were bottlenecking, precisely how many hours of driver overtime Coldwell was quietly burning to mask their scheduling failures, and precisely how Denny's company could restructure the entire regional network to cut delivery times by nearly 18% within the first 90 days. "I'm not going to pretend I don't have a personal stake in this," Marcus said near the end, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "2 weeks ago, I was the man Coldwell fired for warning them. This exact failure was coming. I'm standing here today, not out of bitterness, but because I know this business better than anyone in this room, and I know exactly how to fix what's broken. That's not revenge, that's just the truth." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Priya Shah closed her folder, looked directly at Gary Pruitt, and said the words that would end up changing 4 lives in that room permanently. "Gary, I think we're done here. Thank you for your time." Then she turned to Denny and Marcus. "I'd like to talk numbers with your team by end of week." Coldwell lost the Vantage retail contract 3 days later, a contract worth nearly 40% of their regional revenue. Within a month, the same restructuring Marcus had endured was repeated across Coldwell's leadership, except this time, it wasn't disguised as anything else. Gary Pruitt was let go in a wave of layoffs that followed the lost contract. Walked out with far less grace than he'd shown Marcus. Marcus didn't celebrate his old boss's downfall. He didn't need to. He was too busy building something new. Denny made Marcus a full partner within 6 months, co-owner of what soon became one of the fastest-growing regional freight operators in the state. And when Denny asked Marcus, only half-joking, what he wanted to do about Coldwell's old staff, many of whom Marcus had once managed, all of whom were now scrambling after the layoffs, Marcus didn't hesitate. "Hire every good person they threw away," he said. "Every one of them." It became something of a legend among former Coldwell employees. The day Marcus Bell picked up the phone and made one call that quietly rebuilt an entire company out of the ashes of the one that fired him. Within a year, nearly 24 former Coldwell route supervisors, dispatchers, and warehouse coordinators, the very people Coldwell had deemed expendable, were working under Fleck in a company that valued their experience instead of discarding it for a quarterly savings report. A year to the day after he'd stood in that parking lot holding a cardboard box, Marcus stood in a real office of his own, with his name on the door as Vice President of Operations. Ava, now 8, sat in the chair across from his desk after school, swinging her legs, drawing pictures while she waited for him to finish up. At her school's next career day, she stood in front of her class again, and this time Marcus was there in person, invited as a guest speaker. Ava introduced him with the same fierce pride as before, except now there was nothing for him to hide. "My dad got fired," she told the class matter-of-factly, drawing a few gasps from the other kids, before she grinned and added, "And then he built something even better." Marcus never forgot the humiliation of that box in the parking lot, or the sound of Gary Pruitt's voice saying it was nothing personal. But he learned something that day that no layoff could ever take from him, that the value of a person's work sets to disappear just because someone else fails to recognize it. Sometimes it just takes the right phone call, at the right moment, to prove exactly what you were always worth. If Marcus's story moved you today, make sure you're subscribed, because there are so many more stories like his still to come. Stories about the people who got knocked down and refused to stay there. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of Marcus's journey hit you the hardest. We'll see you in the next one.